guys, it's Lotus and welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to continue on with our read-along of Erha. We are now starting Book 2, Same Destination. Chapter 98, Shizun, I'm begging you, please pay attention to me. Shisheng Peak has a cliff with a funny name called Ah. There were lots of stories in the sect as to how this name came about. The most common one being that people often fell off of it due to how steep it was, thus the name Ah. But Moran knew that wasn't it. The cliff rose high into the clouds, a difficult climb even for apes, and it was extremely cold, its peak covered in snow year-round. This was where the dead of Shisheng Peak were kept while awaiting their funerals. He had only ever come here once in his past life. That time wasn't much different from right now. It was also after the rift of the infinite hells, the bloody battle that ended countless lives. Shinmei was amongst them. Refusing to accept the reality, he had knelt by Shinmei's coffin for days on end, gazing at his face inside, looking almost as if he wasn't dead at all. "It's called Ah from back when your dad passed," was what Shui Zhengyang had told him as he kept him company in the cold of the Frost Sky Hall in the past life. "I only had the one brother. We founded Shisheng Peak together, but your dad, he was just like you, stubborn. He barely even got to enjoy the good life, or maybe he got sick of it, but one slip against the demons and he was gone." It was freezing inside Frost Sky Hall. Shui Zhengyang took a swig from the sheepskin of wine he had brought before offering it to Moran. "You can have some, just don't tell your aunt." Moran didn't take it, didn't even move. Shui Zhengyang sighed. "This cliff is called Ah because I was so miserable in those days. It felt like my heart had been dug out. All I did was stay here with your dad and cry. I sound pretty awful when I cry, just howling like Ah! And that's where the name came from." He glanced at Moran and clapped him on the shoulder. "Uncle isn't well read or anything, but life is ephemeral like this morning dew, over in a blink. Just think of it as Mingjing having gone on a bit ahead of you. You can be brothers again in the next life." Moran's eyes slid slowly shut. Shui Zhengyang continued. "Condolences and whatnot are just words. If you're sad, then just cry. If you don't want to leave, then stay and keep him company. But you have to eat. And drink your water. Go get a bite at Mengpo Fall first. Then you can come back here and kneel as long as you want. I won't stop you." Frost Sky Hall was frigid and silent, white silk drifting lightly within the grand hall, like gentle fingers brushing the brow. Moran opened his eyes slowly. The coffin was the same as the one in his memory, cast from the black snow of Kunlun, lustrous and translucent, threads of cold streaming from the surface. Only, the one lying inside was now Chua Ning. Moran never would have thought that the one to die in the heavenly rift of this lifetime would be Chua Ning. He was taken by surprise, didn't know how to react. Faced with this person's ice-cold body, he actually didn't feel much of anything, not joy from the death of his foe, nor grief from the passing of his Shizun. Moran stared at Chua Ning through lowered lashes for a long time, almost doubtful. His face looked even colder than usual, truly covered in a layer of frost now, specks of ice clinging to the lashes of his closed eyes. His lips were a pale blue, and his skin was nearly transparent, the light blue of the veins visible like minute cracks on porcelain. How could he have been the one to die? Moran lifted his hand to touch Chua Ning's cheek. It felt cold. His hand trailed down, to his throat, his neck. There was no pulse. And then to his hand. He gripped his hand. The joints were already starting to stiffen, and the skin there felt rough. Moran thought it strange. The tips of Chua Ning's fingers were lightly calloused, but his palms had always been soft and delicate. He looked closer despite himself, only to see scores of lacerations, open cuts that, although cleaned, will never heal now. He remembered Shui Meng's words. His spiritual energy was completely drained. He was no different from any ordinary person at that time. Couldn't use any techniques at all, not even a communication spell. He could only carry you on his back and climb up the stairs of Shisheng Peak, step by step. And when he couldn't do it anymore, couldn't stand anymore, he crawled on the ground, on his knees, dragging him, until his fingers were torn and his hands were covered in blood, all to bring him home. Moran muttered hollowly. Was it you who carried me back? ... Chuaning, was it you? ... I won't believe it unless you nod, Moran said to the person in the coffin, his expression placid as if certain that the person before him would wake up. Chuaning, give me a nod. Just one nod and I'll believe you, and I won't hate you anymore. Just one nod, okay? But Chuaning only continued to lie there, cold and expressionless, as if he didn't care the slightest bit whether Moran hated him or not. He himself had left with a clear conscience, leaving others to survive with their guilt. This person, whether alive or dead, was always more maddening than he was sympathetic. Moran suddenly sneered. Then again, he said, when have you ever listened to me? Staring at Chuaning, he suddenly felt that it was all so absurd. All these years, he hated Chuaning because he looked down on him, and the hatred deepened because he didn't save Shimei. Turning and twisting, this hatred persisted for more than 10 years, but one day, all of a sudden, he was told that when Chuaning turned and left back then, it was to protect you. He was suddenly told that the discernment barriers twined. Whatever damage you took, he suffered the same. His spiritual energy was spent. He couldn't even protect himself anymore. Great. Just perfect. Chuaning is right in everything he does. Then, what about him? Head in the dark like a knowing nothing idiot, running around in circles like a goddamn clown, hissing and snarling in his hatred for so long? And for what? A brief misunderstanding is like a smudge of dirt on a healing wound. As long as it's discovered in time, washed off, and the salve reapplied, everything will be fine. But if the misunderstanding goes on for 10, 20 years, and the person trapped in the web puts in endless hatred, too many cares, countless restraints, and even his life, these emotions will scab over and grow into new skin, forming part of the body. And then, to suddenly be told that, that's not it, that's all wrong. What to do then? The dirt from back then had already lodged under the skin with the passing of time, had already immersed into the blood. The healed flesh would have to be torn open again to remove that bygone hatred. A misunderstanding of 1 year is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding of 10 years is an injustice. A misunderstanding of a lifetime, from life to death, is fate. Their fate was blighted. The heavy gates of the Frost Sky Hall opened slowly. Just like in the previous lifetime, Shui Zhengyang, a sheepskin of wine in hand, walked heavily to Moran's side and sat down on the floor next to him. I heard you were here. Uncle will keep you company. Shui Zhengyang's fierce eyes were still red, clearly having cried not long ago. And him too. Moran said nothing. Shui Zhengyang twisted open the cap and took several big gulps before suddenly stilling, wiping roughly at his face and forcing a grin as he said, Yu Heng never liked it when I drank. Now... Sigh. No, never mind, never mind. I'm not even that old, but I've already seen off so many friends. Ron do you know what kind of feeling this is? ... Moran lowered his lashes. Shui Zhengyang had asked him the same question in the past life. Back then, all he saw was Shinmei's lifeless body. What did he care if others lived or died? He didn't understand, nor did he want to. But how could he not understand now? Before he had been reborn, he had stood alone in the empty halls of Wushan Palace. One day, jolting awake from a light slumber in which he had dreamt of bygone days spent as Yu Heng's disciple, he had the sudden impulse to go see his old room at the disciple quarters. The narrow room, unused for so long, was covered in dust when he opened the door and stepped inside. He had found a small fragrance burner toppled on the floor, knocked over by someone, some time. He picked it up and reflexively went to put it back to its original place. But the years had flowed by like a rapid stream. Holding the burner, he suddenly froze. Where did I used to keep this burner? He couldn't remember. His eagle-like gaze swept across the attendants at his back, but their faces were nothing but blurs. He couldn't even tell one from another. But of course, these people wouldn't know where in the room of his youth the Emperor used to keep this fragrance burner. Where did I used to keep this burner? He couldn't remember, and anyone who could was already dead or gone. How could Moran not understand how Shui Zhengyang felt right now? Every now and then I would remember some joke from my youth, out of the blue, and just blurt it out, but then realize that not a single person who gets it is even around anymore. Shui Zhengyang took another swig of wine and, lowering his head, let out a mirthless laugh. Like your dad, or our friends from before, or your Shizun. Fragments of light reflecting off the wetness in his eyes, he asked, Rod-er, do you know why this cliff is called Ah? Moran knew what he wanted to say, but was too distraught right now to want to listen to Shui Zhengyang talk about his dead father, so he responded, I know, it's because Uncle used to cry here. Ah. Shui Zhengyang paused and blinked slowly, wrinkles deep at the corners of his eyes. Did your aunt already tell you? Shui Zhengyang wiped away his tears and inhaled deeply. Alright, okay. Then you already know what Uncle wanted to tell you. Go ahead and let it out if you're sad. It's alright. There's no shame in crying for someone. But Moran didn't cry. Maybe because his heart had already become hard as iron from 2 lifetimes of this. Compared to how devastated he had been back then when Shimei died, the current him was so very calm. So calm that he was unsettled by his own numbness, unaware that he was actually this heartless. Shui Zhengyang finished drinking and stayed a while longer before getting up, his movements a little unsteady. Maybe his legs had gone numb from kneeling for so long, or maybe he had drank too much. His broad hand clapped Moran on the shoulder. The Heavenly Rift's been closed, but we still don't know who's behind it all. Maybe that was the end of it, but there might also be another big battle coming up. Ron-er, make sure you go down and eat something. Don't wreck your body. Having said that, he turned and left. It was nighttime, and outside Frost Sky Hall, a waning crescent hung high in the skies above. Treading through the snow that covered the cliff year-round with half a skin of wine in hand, Shui Zhengyang's voice, deep and rough like a broken gong, rang out in a short tune from Shuzhong. Greetings, old friends, but half are gone, meeting only in cups of wine. Beneath the osmanthus tree hides a pot of wine, a drink shared between aged faces and streaks of white. The first light of dawn shatters the dream and all depart, leaving me alone with my old tears. I'd give what remains of my life to the god of dreams, if only to call you back, cup after cup. It was different from the past life after all. Who died wasn't Shimei, but Chuaning, and so Shui Zhengyang was struck by even deeper sorrows. With his back facing the open gates of Frost Sky Hall, Moran listened to the lingering sound of that hoarse voice, resounding yet mournful. Slowly, the voice grew distant like a soaring eagle, until it was swallowed by the wind and snow. The world thus blanketed by a layer of bright white, the moon high in the vast, boundless sky washing over everything until it was all so faint and unsubstantial, leaving only one line to echo over and over. Leaving me alone with my old tears. Leaving me alone with my old tears. Moran wasn't sure how long had passed when he eventually left Frost Sky Hall to walk slowly down the mountain. Uncle was right. The Heavenly Rift may have been closed, but things might not be over yet. Chuaning isn't here anymore. If there is to be another battle, he'll have to defend for himself. It was already late by the time he got to Mengpo Hall, and there was no one else around aside from the old woman making the late-night supper. Moran asked for a small bowl of noodles and found a corner spot to slowly eat. The noodles were hot and numbing, warm in his stomach. The dimly lit Mengpo Hall was hazy when he looked up between large ravenous bites through the thick screen of steam. He vaguely recalled how stubborn he had been in the past life after Shimei's death, how he had refused to leave or eat for 3 days straight, and how after, when he had finally been talked into leaving Frost Sky Hall to go eat something, he had happened across Chuaning in the kitchen, his back facing him as he clumsily rolled wrappers and mixed fillings, and how there had been flour and water on the table, and a couple rows of wontons neatly lined. Clang! The loud sound of everything being swept off that table rang out from the bygone past, stilling the chopsticks in the hands of the present Moran, making it hard for him to swallow. At that time, he had thought that Chuaning was taunting him, that he purposely wanted to hurt him. But thinking about it now, maybe Chuaning really did only want to make him a bowl of wontons in place of the departed Shimei. Who the F do you think you are? Do you have any right to use the things he used? To make the food he did? Shimei is dead. Are you happy now? Or do you have to hound all your disciples to death or madness before you're satisfied? Chuaning, there is no one left in this world who could make those wontons ever again. No matter how much you imitate him, you'll never even come close. Each word a stab to the heart. He went back to eating his noodles, not wanting to think about it anymore. But it wasn't that easy. His memories wouldn't leave him be. He remembered Chuaning's face with such clarity, clearer than ever before. His face had betrayed nothing, not joy and not sorrow. He remembered every detail of that moment with such unprecedented clarity. He remembered the faint trembling at the tips of those fingers, the smudge of flour on the side of that cheek. He remembered the plump, snowy wontons all over the floor. He remembered how Chuaning had lowered his lashes and then bent down to slowly pick them up from the floor, those wontons that could no longer be eaten, and then thrown them away himself. Thrown them away himself. There was still more than half the bowl of noodles with peas left, but Moran couldn't eat another bite. Pushing the bowl away, he fled this place that was going to drive him insane. He ran madly through Sisheng Peak, as if trying to outrun this decade-long misunderstanding, as if trying to get back those ridiculous years, as if trying to catch up to that person who had left Mengpo Hall all alone that day. Catch up to him so that he could say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong to hate you." In the darkness of night, Moran ran aimlessly. He ran and ran, but he saw fragments of Chuaning's shadow everywhere he went. The platform of sin and virtue, where he had taught him to read and trained him in the sword. Naihe Bridge, where he had shared an umbrella with him as they walked together. Clear Sky Hall, where he had endured punishment by striking and left all alone. He felt more and more distraught, more and more helpless. Suddenly, he ran into an open clearing, and it abruptly felt like the haze had dissipated and he could see the bright moon high above again. Breathing heavily, he stopped running. The heaven-piercing tower, the place where he had died in the past life, the place where he had met Chuaning for the first time. Mayhem in his eyes like a battlefield in chaos, heartbeats wild like the beating of war drums, unable to ward off the tidal surge of the past and helpless to avoid its relentless assault. He had been forced here in the end. Where the moonlight was a pale white, and the breeze a gentle caress, where they had first met. Moran finally stopped running. He knew he couldn't escape it, the fact that, in this life, he was bound to owe Chuaning. Slowly, he walked up the steps, walked toward that magnificent haitang tree. He reached out and touched the bark of the trunk, dry and hard like a calloused heart. It had already been nearly 3 days since Chuaning's death. Moran looked up. The flowering tree was gentle as it always had been. Only then did a bout of boundless sorrow suddenly well up in his chest, and pressing his forehead against the trunk of the tree, he finally started crying, tears falling like rain. "Shizun! Shizun!" he murmured between choked sobs, repeating over and over his words from when he first met Chuaning. "Won't you pay attention to me? Pay attention to me!" But though things remained the same, the people had changed, and in front of the heaven-piercing tower now there was only him. No one paid attention to him. No one would come again. The reborn Moran had the body of a youth, but inside was the soul of the 32-year-old Ta Xianjun. He had seen far too much life and death, tasted all the sorrows and joys that the world had to offer, and so, in this reborn life, he never really showed much genuine emotion, always muted as if hidden behind a mask. But right now, the loss and anguish written on his face was so raw, so vulnerable, so genuine, so naive. Only now was he truly like an ordinary youth who had lost his Shizun, like a child who had been abandoned, like a stray dog that had lost its home and could never again find its way back. He said, "Pay attention to me. Pay attention to me." But, in the end, his only answer was the rustling of the leaves and the dancing shadows of the flowers. The person with the striking features under the haitang tree that year would never again, could never again, lift his head and look at him. Not even just one last glance. Author's notes. Big White Cat's talking corpse, thanking JJWXC readers. Pup. Crying face. Pup.exe is still glitching. Big White Cat shoots him a glance, sighs, and takes the script from his hands. Big White Cat reading Pup's lines for him. The rest of the things. Aww. Okay, so to recap chapter 98, Moran has stayed by Chuaning's coffin and he just can't come to terms with what happened, he realized that there was a big misunderstanding and that his Shizun really was genuine to him and that he shouldn't have hated him for all those years, decades and lifetimes worth of hate, now because of one misunderstanding, means nothing. Moran is having an existential crisis. He can't believe he misunderstood his Shizun. He feels completely guilty. He wants Chuaning to come back. He's begging Chuaning to please look at him, but Chuaning is gone. And Moran doesn't know how to cope. He can't believe that he treated his Shizun so badly, that he had become a monster that he himself could not recognize. And he even realized, he thought back to the first lifetime when Shimei had died, and how he treated Chuaning terribly, how Chuaning had tried to make him wontons to cheer him up, and Moran had rebuked him and tossed the wontons onto the floor, and ended up hating Chuaning to the bone, when in actuality Chuaning was just trying to be nice to him and really cared about him. Moran doesn't know what to do with this information, and he's just out of it. He's completely inconsolable right now. So, and like it said, he finally got to actually cry genuinely for the first time in a long time, and so it's therapeutic and cathartic, but at the same time he's completely heartbroken. So let's continue on with the next chapter. What's gonna happen? Chuaning has been dead for 3 days. Shizun. Chapter 99. Shizun's third weapon. That night, Moran slept leaning against the Haitang tree. There were many places at Sisheng Peak that had traces of Chuaning having lived there. If he wanted to pay his respects, there was no place more suitable than Red Lotus Pavilion. But only leaning against this tree dulled the ache in his heart. Only here could he feel a faint connection to the world of the living. He had once thought that taking Chuaning as his master was the greatest misfortune of his life. That it was a mistake from the very start. Only now did he finally realize that the unfortunate one wasn't him, wasn't Mo Wei Yu, but the one standing beneath the flowers that day, head lowered and lost in thought. The unfortunate one was Chuaning. Xianjun, pay attention to me. Vaguely, he seemed to recall that being the first thing he had said to Shizun. Maybe not those exact words, it had been too long ago, and he no longer remembered too clearly. But he could still clearly remember the look on Chuaning's face when those eyelashes flickered up, bewildered and startled, and how gentle he had looked. Lying beneath the flowering tree, Moran thought that, if time could flow backward to the day he chose his master, then he absolutely, no matter what, shouldn't cling to Chuaning to accept him as a disciple again. Because the price for the flicker of those eyelashes in that instant was the endless entanglement to follow, was Chuaning's very life. 2 lifetimes he had ruined in his hands. 2 lifetimes he had been ruined in his hands. For 2 lifetimes. His throat moved in a swallow as he closed his eyes against the rising threat of a sob. A long, long time passed in an agony that felt like a million ants gnawing at his heart before he finally drifted off into a light slumber. And then, in his dreamscape, that segment of memory that he hadn't dared touch since his rebirth struggled free of its chains, raised its knife, and carved out his heart. The him of that time had stood at the very top of the human realm, and Chuaning, spiritual core abolished, was imprisoned in his palace. But he had been targeted by several assassination attempts in a row, the last of which had been perpetuated by Xuemeng and Mei Han Shui. Moran was too powerful to yield to them his life, but he did sustain grave injuries from it and had to stay in his palace and recover for more than a month before he got his strength back. Shuzhong was a rainy place, even more so during those days, pitter-pattering without stop. Fingers pale as jade clutching the edge of the heavy brocade cloak draped over his shoulders, Moran stood beneath the stoa, gazing at the gray skies above, the expression on his face one caught between mirth and madness. He didn't speak, but anyone could feel the twisted nature radiating from his person. He had been born with such a handsome face, but the light in his eyes was dark and ruthless, devoid of any warmth. And the longer he sat on that throne, the darker it became. Footsteps sounded from behind him. Without looking back, he said, "You're here? Are you going to lay waste to Kunlun Tashui Palace?" Chuaning's voice rang out faintly in the grand hall. Moran replied, "And what if I am? Haven't you forgotten what you promised me? That you wouldn't go after Xuemeng's life anymore?" Moran's voice was calm, and even as he spoke, and even as he spoke. Shizun came all this way and didn't even stop to ask how my injuries are doing, or whether I'm cold standing out here in the wind. All he cares about is who I'm going to kill. Mo Wei Yu, I came to tell you to stop doing things you'll end up regretting. Huh, regret? Shouldn't you be the one regretting? Your core is already shattered from our fight back when you tried to stop me from raising Rufeng's sect. You're just an ordinary person now, without the strength to oppose me now that I'm going to raise Tashui Palace. Don't you regret not minding your own business back then? Moran turned to look over his shoulder at him, a flicker in his eyes and a cruel smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Chuaning, you worthless cripple, what exactly do you hope to stop me with? Chuaning couldn't find any words for a long while, maybe because he really did have nothing left. A loud clap of thunder suddenly split the skies and rain poured forth, streaming down the roof and spilling from the eaves. Finally, Chuaning closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, all that he said was a quiet, "Don't go." Moran turned around with a flutter of black robes. Framed by the ashen skies behind him and torrential rain amidst freezing winds, he looked at Chuaning within the hall. And why shouldn't I go? I've already given Xuemeng his chance. That year, when you willingly gave yourself to me for his sake, I kept my word and spared his life in exchange for you. But now he's the one after my life? So tell me, why shouldn't I let go? ... Well, nothing to say? Moran scoffed. Go on, berate me, curse me out, say something. Chuaning, where did all that might of yours go? I already know Xuemeng's your favorite, your best disciple. You think he's earnest and sincere, and I'm just the mud on the bottom of his boot. That's enough. Chuaning's brows were knitted tight on his pale face, as if trying to hold something back. That is not enough! How could it be? The sight filled Moran's heart with a savage glee, anger, ecstasy, hatred, and jealousy scorching his heart with their intensity. His eyes glinted as he paced back and forth. There's no second chance, Chuaning. There's no second chance for him. I'm going to kill him, and I'm going to skin him for a rug, drink wine from his skull. I'll scoop out his insides, chop him up, and stew him. You can't stop me. Chuaning, you can't stop me. Eyes reddened, he grew more enraptured the more he raved, frenzied, and crazed, when suddenly a hand fisted the collar of his robes and another landed on his face. Snap out of it! Chuaning's face was so close he could see the quiver of his eyelashes and the wetness in his eyes. Moran, wake up already. Wake up! I am awake! The burn of his cheek only drove him further into madness. Glaring at Chuaning's face, he felt a sudden flare of anger. I'm perfectly effing awake. You're the one that's asleep. Are you blind? He shoved him off and ripped open the collar of his robes to reveal blood-stained bandages. Are you blind, Chuaning? He roared, jabbing at his own chest, and when even that didn't feel like enough, ripped the gauze right off to show the bloody mess beneath. Who do you think did this? Your good disciple, Xuemeng. If he had aimed his long cheng just a bit more to the side, I'd be dead right now, so tell me why the F should I let him go? As far as you're concerned, his life is a life, but mine doesn't count? Is that it? In a fit of rage, Moran grabbed Chuaning's hand without warning and pressed it to his bloody wound. Didn't you want to stop me? Fine, here's your chance. Go on and dig out my heart then. Chuaning, why don't you just dig out my effing heart then? ... The tips of Chuaning's fingers, cold as ice, trembled. Moran glared at him, furiously, ruthlessly, the veins at his neck throbbing. His voice was raw and raspy as he said, Go on, dig it out. The deluge of rain against the roof was frenzied madness. Dead silence. Neither moved. An indeterminate amount of time passed before Moran finally let go of Chuaning's hand and, breath low and harsh, declared in a deep voice, I'm taking Xue Ziming and Mei Han Xue's lives. ... Go ahead and hate me, Shizun, he said. My life's already like this anyway. Our lives are already like this. None of us can turn back now, so might as well just keep going in the darkness. I'll just drag some old friends along for company on my way to hell. That day, looking at the black robes on his back as he walked away, Chuaning finally spoke. He said, Moran, if you destroy Tashui Palace and kill Xuemeng, then I'll die in front of you. I have nothing left to trade for you. I have nothing left to trade you with, but at least I can still choose death. Hearing that, Moran paused before turning to look over his shoulder. a smile spreading across his handsome face against the dreary backdrop of wind and rain. This venerable one will not allow you to die. ... Lest you forget, even when all the blood had drained out of your body, I still managed to take you back from the very gates of death. You're gonna spend the rest of this life with me, no matter how much you disgust me. After venting his madness, Moran's expression gradually returned to its usual charm. Usual calm, cold, and threatened. Wait, sorry, let me say that sentence again. After venting his madness, Moran's expression gradually returned to its usual calm, cold, and threatening. He said, "My good Shizun, just be good and stay here at Sisheng Peak. When I capture Xuemeng, I'll bring him back here so he can get a good long look at the god that he worries over day and night, writhing under me like a wanton little slut. After all, in consideration of our shared past, it's only right that I grant him the courtesy of full comprehension before he dies." But, against all expectations, Chu Zhongshi was still Chu Zhongshi. 1 month later, standing proudly at the summit of Kunlun Mountain, in front of the Heavenly Lake, Moran did exactly what he said he would. He captured Meihan Shui and Xuemeng and tied them to pillars of ice before using Zhenlong chess formation to control all the thousands at Chashui Palace to slaughter one another as they were forced to watch. The snowy mountain, once pristine and majestic, was dyed crimson in an instant. Blood ran into the lake, seeped into the ground. Moran sat calmly before the palace gates, eating grapes brought by the servants and smiling as he watched the scene. Looking at Xuemeng, his eyes glazed and unfocused, he asked, "Meng, do you like it?" ... Xuemeng didn't react, as if having lost his hearing. Pleased, Moran smiled even more affectionately as he said, "Cousin staged this show just for you. Are you enjoying it?" "Spare Tashui Palace," came a faint abrupt murmur. Moran blinked. "What?" "Spare Tashui Palace." There was no light in Xuemeng's usually bright eyes. "Let them go. Let Meihan Shui go. I was the one who tried to kill you that time. Just kill me. Leave everyone else out of it." Moran couldn't help but laugh. "Are you trying to talk terms with me?" "No." Xuemeng's eyes were hollow as he said, "I'm begging you." The darling of the heavens said, "I'm begging you." Moran's eyes gleamed, the demon in his heart delighted by these words. As if amused, he gripped Xuemeng by the jaw and forced him to look up at himself, and was just about to say something when a burst of radiant green lit up the skyline. "What's going on?" His retinue didn't even get a chance to respond before a spiritual array, flowing and resplendent, stretched out from high above the towering peak to cover all the thousands of miles of Kunlun Mountain. And there, above the array, stood Chuaning, robes white as snow fluttering lightly amongst the clouds. A guqin of an unusual shape hung in the air before him, pitch black all over with its tail end curving upwards in a flourish of branches, blooming with dew-laden high-tongue blossoms that glowed with a luminescent radiance. Chuaning's third holy weapon, Jiuge. Jiuge means 9 songs, songs addressed to deities and fallen heroes. Author's notes: even though 0.5 Mutt is hopelessly perverse and insane, but strangely I like writing 0.5 related plot events very much, ha ha ha. You're welcome to help previous timelines Shizun ferociously whip this previous timeline's Mutt, ha ha ha. Thanks, Meatbun. Yeah, 0.5 Mutt is really, really evil and crazed and possessed by some demonic spiritual essence or something. Like, Moran is out of his mind right now. He's, even now, even though he has the memories of his past life, 1.0 Moran is looking back like, damn, Tashi and Jun was crazy. Yeah, but end of chapter 99. So to recap, Moran is walking around Sisheng Peak, and everywhere he looks, he's reminded of his Shizun. He feels so bad, and he truly believes that it's his fault, that he is the one to blame, and that he is a curse that has ruined Chuaning's life for 2 lifetimes. He told himself that if we were ever to be reborn again, I would stay away from Chuaning because I am just a curse that would ruin his life. Poor Moran, but like, man, I mean, it's a loaded situation because 1.0 did his best to really reform himself, but 0.5 Moran was really, really bad. like really bad. He talked about slaughtering innocents. He was gonna kill Xuemeng. He was really ruthless to Chuaning and obsessive and possessive. Like, he believes he hates Chuaning to the core, but at the same time, he can't live without Chuaning. Like, Chuaning threatened to kill himself, or threatened to die, if Moran kills Xuemeng, and Moran's like, you'll never be able to die. You're gonna stay with me for the rest of my life. I'm not gonna let you die. Now, like, if he, like, Moran, can't you see that if you don't want your Shizun to die, that's because you like him, and you don't want him to leave you? You don't want him to abandon you? He was going through some stuff back then. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's more to the story than just him turning evil because of Shinmei's death. Like, for him to become that angry at the entire cultivation world for Shinmei's death seems implausible. That doesn't make any sense. It's understandable if he had a misunderstanding and hated Chuaning, like he blamed Chuaning, but for him to blame the entire cultivation world and to become an emperor, that doesn't make any sense. Why would he want to do that? Yeah, so I feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions, but I do appreciate Meatbun giving us a lot of flashback scenes now, so we're kind of seeing, you know, what's going on between Ta Xianjun and Chuaning, and eventually, I think in the next chapter or two, we're probably going to see how Chuaning dies in the first life. Moran is just going through a lot of trauma. He's stuck in his head. He's thinking about how he saw Chuaning die twice. Once in his first life and once in his second life. And I don't know how he's going to cope, because I think he low-key went crazy after Chuaning died in the first life. After Chuaning died, he pretty much gave up on everything. Like, he took his own life in the end, and that's how he ended up being reborn as 1.0. So, you know, Moran, hang in there, dude. Also, like I said, I know Chuaning's gonna come back because, you know, there's gonna be a 2.0 Moran, so there has to be another Shizun. But, Moran, please treat your Shizun a lot better in his next life. Please, please, just pamper him and spoil him and give him cuddles and, you know, treat him like he's precious, because your other two lives, you didn't do so well in that department, and so I think you need to really make it up to Chuaning. Yeah, you have to try harder, okay? Try harder. Anyway, that's all I have for today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's read-along. It was really heavy, again, just like the previous 2 chapters. Moran is just kind of going through the feels right now. Everyone is really depressed, and this mood is really somber. Hopefully, we learn more about what happens in his past life as Ta Xianjun, and then we can move forward with him trying to find a way to find Chuaning in the next life. Yes, okay. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed today's read-along, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!